I'm Chris Yannick today on CYInterview here for the yearly college football preview. We welcome back college football expert Phil Steele. He's back again 29 years in a row with his college football preview magazine. You can find it at philsteele.com. Phil, as always, thanks for being on CYInterview today with us. How are you?
Hey, I am doing great, Chris. How about yourself? And Rob, how are you doing?
I'm blessed and highly favored, Phil, and super honored to be on this call with you right now.
And also, of course, here with us today is CYInterview sponsor, the founder of Epic Financial Strategies LLC, Mr. Rob Gill. Rob, happy Trajectory Tuesday. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you for asking. How about yourself, brother?
Doing very well. So just to begin, Phil, let's just take a look at this. Who are your four predictions to make the college football playoff for your preseason prediction? And 29 years, what does it mean, 29 years to still have something the greatest, most accurate preseason magazine in college football history?
Yeah, well, it's, I tell you, Chris, it takes about 7 months. Well, it does take 7 months to put this thing together each and every year. I do it in a 3 write-through process. This year I talked to 123 of the 133 head coaches, and that's usually my 3rd write-through is after talking to the head coaches, getting it all together. But for the Final Four this year, I went out on a limb there and I picked Georgia to get there. How about that? And so I got Georgia number 1. Number 2 this year, I went a little out of the box. I saw a lot of preseason top 10s that didn't even have Clemson in there, but I've got Clemson for a couple of reasons. When I talked to Coach Dabo Sweeney, going over the team with him, he said that the defensive line, if you remember that 2018 defensive line, which was loaded with first-round draft picks, he said that this year's defensive line doesn't have the star power of 2018, but the group is deeper in talent and experience. They also got their top 2 linebackers back in Carter and Trotter, a veteran secondary, the offensive line, receiving core, both improved. They've got Shipley and Maffa at running back, and I think Cade Klubnik does well at QB. Their toughest 2 games this year are Florida State, Notre Dame, and they get them both at home. I've got Clemson favored in all 12 games, running the table and making the playoffs at number 2. Number 3, I went to the Big Ten, and it was tough. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, they're all right there. In fact, Ohio State's number 2 in my power poll, the 2nd most talented team in the country. Michigan number 3, and Penn State number 5. So 3 top 5 teams in the same division, for crying out loud. But of the 3 teams, Michigan's got the best schedule. They do get Ohio State at home. The non-conference schedule's easy. And I feel this is Jim Harbaugh's best team he's put on the field in his 9 years. They've got one of the top offensive lines in the country, one of the top defenses, and of all the main contenders this year, they're one of the few that has a returning starting quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. And then number 4, I went with Alabama. And how do you go against Nick Saban? I mean, any year he's not preseason number 1 when expectations are lowered, that's usually when he finishes number 1. The last time they were preseason number 4, they finished number 1. The last time they weren't preseason number 1 was 2020. Guess what? Finished number 1. They're still trying to figure out their quarterback, but I think they'll get the decision right. They've got tons of talent, and they get LSU and Tennessee both at home this year. So I've got Bama making the playoff as well.
Rob, Phil has been a sports media entrepreneur for almost 30 years, doing it himself. Still to this day, 100,000 copies of his preview magazine go out to the entire United States. You can now also look at it online and buy it online at philsteele.com. Questions for Phil Steele, anything related to college football and being a sports media entrepreneur?
Yeah, first of all, I love the congruency. I love the map. I love the language. I love the sequencing of everything he just said. The tonality, incredible. Obviously, this man is certain in what he's talking about. Thank you, Phil, for all that. I guess my question is, we know who the top teams typically are, right? There's that pattern of success. When you ask questions of coaches, right, like, and you're trying to distill who's your top 4, who's going to make it into the Final Four, what are some of the deeper questions that you would ask that gives you not only a clue on if, in fact, you're going to put them in your favor or not based on how they answer it?
Yeah, that's interesting, Rob. And I think my interviews with the coaches are different from pretty much anybody else's interview with the coaches. I'm a let's get down to business and talk about the players type of guy. And what I do is I have team pages, which have every single player on the team listed at their position with all their stats, all my notes on each player, everything about them. And I send those pages to the coaches. And then we usually talk about, 5 minutes about, hey, last season. I might ask them about a game or two, how that went for them. But then we dive right into it. We just go over every player on the team. They give me strengths and weaknesses of the players. Then they wrap up the position for me. Do they feel they're better or weaker at each position? How do they feel overall? They're confident. And the calls generally take about an hour. I would say on the average with all the coaches out there. So they're a long, tedious process. Something I enjoy though. I like going over all the players, learning the strengths and weaknesses, and that's generally how I get the feel for each team is how I feel about each position after talking to the coach.
And Chris, can I have a follow up to that if you don't mind?
Sure, of course. Go ahead. Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so when you're working with these coaches and you're having these conversations, because I heard you say it takes about 7 months to figure all that stuff out, and that's one of the components that you come up with I'm assuming your final decision. Is there coaches that sometimes play a little bit of poker with you, or can you? I'm sure 29 years you could see everything coming from a mile away. Do you find yourself asking deeper questions based on certain responses that you may not feel you're getting the accurate information on, or they're just so terrified because you've been around so long they don't want to rock the boat?
I think generally I could tell when a coach is given coach speak.
Yep.
And, I said I talked to 123 of the 133 head coaches. There are some that might be pure coach speak, not willing to give me the true details. And there's no need to talk to that coach in the future. You know what I mean? So I think everybody's pretty much legit with me in their answers. Now, some coaches are higher on their players. Naturally you get to the third string and they're like, hey, this guy could be all conference. And some coaches are lower on their players. They might say, about the starter who was first team all conference last year. Well, he's okay. So you just have to learn the coach, learn how he talks about his players, and then get the overall gist of how it's going. But you pretty much have to learn who you're talking to.
Last question, Chris, because I'm enjoying this. Phil,
sure, absolutely.
What is the if you could think of one, maybe two, right? One or two teams that completely over the last 29 years, or especially when we got into the playoff, however you want to answer it, that surprised you, and what was it about that team that you may have missed that they excelled in a way that you've never anticipated?
Well, let's go to last year, for example. TCU making it to the championship game. That did surprise me. Going over the team with Coach Dykes prior to the year, he was happy with the talent they had, but it was a first-year head coach taking over a team with a lot of transfer portal guys, and you wondered how they would all fit. I think they were picked 7th or 8th in the Big 12 last year, and here they are playing in the championship game. So that to me would be the one that probably stands out to me as the biggest surprise of the bunch. I generally, if there's a team that's not in the top 10 that's contending for a playoff spot at the end of the year, they make my surprise team list at the start of the year. And TCU was actually did not make that list last year, which is rare for me to actually miss a team like that.
Yeah, I think the transfer portal, to that point with the NIL, I actually have my own NIL collective that I started vis-a-vis through my high school AAU program, believe it or not. And I think the transfer portal obviously is changing the game. And speaking of a brand new coach with a bunch of transfers, that could be a pattern we see going forward, I would assume.
Yeah, and something else that happened last year, and I'll go over my conversation with Coach Aranda. Remember 2 years ago at Baylor, seemed to win all the close games, especially down the stretch. And then last year, he felt the team didn't have that same edge at the second half of the season. Remember, I think they lost their last 5 games last year, and he felt that going into the fourth quarter, he didn't see the same confidence in his guys. Let's go back to TCU season last year. They trailed and made a miracle comeback and won, and they trailed, made a miracle comeback and won. They trailed, made miracle comeback and won. Now all of a sudden the TCU players are thinking, well, we're going to win this game no matter if we're down 14 points in the fourth quarter or not. And I think that confidence level helped them get to where they were last year.
Interesting.
Phil, so just a couple of follow-ups. So we've talked about the top 4, obviously. So there's a couple of others in the top 10 I think may have a chance to make the college football playoff. USC, Texas, and Notre Dame. Tell me about those. Is there somebody else you think is more likely than those to make the top 4 that is outside of your top 4 prediction?
Yeah, when you look at Texas this year, I'll be honest with you, the one thing I thought of heading into the magazine process, I start the Sunday after Thanksgiving, was I don't want to pick Texas to win the Big 12. Everybody's going to be gunning for them. It's their final year in the Big 12. And, Texas, it seems like every year disappoints their backers. Everybody thinks they're going to finish higher and they finish lower than expected. But If you look at my Big 12 rankings, they rank number 1 or tied for number 1 in every single position category of the Big 12. They are the most talented team, both offensively, defensively, and special teams. And I ended up picking them number 1 in the Big 12 based on just the overall talent, not necessarily what I wanted to do at the start. With USC, the key for them is going to be the defense. Can the defense be improved? Now, Lincoln Riley, when I talked to him, they did bring in a lot of top-notch transfers on the defensive side of the ball. They brought in Bear Alexander from Georgia, who's one of the top defensive linemen, 315 pounds in the middle. Anthony Lucas from Texas A&M, 295 pounds at defensive end. One of Oklahoma State's top tacklers, and Mason Cobb. They brought in Christian Roland Wallace, one of the top cornerbacks in the Pac-12. I do believe their defense will be good, not great, but they don't need to be great, not with Caleb Williams in that offense. They do have to play both Notre Dame and Oregon on the road, which is why I didn't pick them to make the playoff this year. And they were plus 22 in turnovers last year. Generally, if you read my turnovers equals turnover round article, teams have a weaker record the next year, but I think this team's got the best schedule of the teams in the Pac-12, and I think they deserve to be up there. And with Notre Dame, I'm a little surprised they didn't make the preseason AP top 10. I think they came in number 13, and that makes them a surprise team this year in my mind. Marcus Freeman last year opened up 0-3. He lost his bowl game, and which was his first game as a head coach, and then his first 2 games last year. But then went 9-1 with a lot of wins over ranked teams, including a 35-14 win over Clemson at home. This year, his defense has 8 starters back. They've got a veteran offensive line. They rate one of the best in the country. And last year, they used a backup quarterback the majority of the year. This year, they bring in Sam Hartman from Wake Forest, who's one of the best QBs in the country, to go along with the run game led by Estime at running back, to go along with a great special teams, which I rank number 2 in the country. And their schedule sets up well. They play Ohio State week 4, and Ohio State's got a first-year starting quarterback making his first true road start. They play USC at home in October when it could be cold, and the home team in that series is actually 8-1 the last 9 years. They do play Clemson on the road, but even if they lose at Clemson, I think an 11-1 Notre Dame, if they have wins over Ohio State and USC, would indeed make the playoffs. So I think all 3 of those teams are threats this year.
So obviously, CYInterview being based here in Las Vegas, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Rebels have a new coach this year. Can they finally get to a bowl game? Just missed that last year, as you know.
You know, I like the overall talent that Barry Odom's inheriting here. They're number 55 on my experience chart. I like Doug Brumfield at the quarterback spot. They added in a guy like Vincent Davis at running back coming in from Pitt, which is nice. Veteran receiving core. Schedule looks a little tough, though. You look at the non-conference slate, they're going to be an underdog at Michigan. They'll be an underdog against Vanderbilt. I feel they'll be an underdog at UTEP as well. So they might open up 1-3. The key is going to be how quickly Barry Odom gets his team adjusted to his new systems that he's bringing in. Right now, I don't have them making a bowl game, but I do think Barry Odom, by season's end, will have this team playing its best ball. Then all they would have to do is maybe upset a Wyoming at home or a San Jose State at home and have a chance to go from 5-7 to the 6 wins in a bowl game.
So speaking of the toughest schedules, I think there's a lot of attention, as you know, and hype around Colorado with Deion Sanders coming in as the head coach. You have them having the toughest schedule in the nation. I looked at the schedule. Are there 3 or 4 wins at best on this schedule? I can't imagine there's more than that.
Yeah, the over-under win total in Vegas, where you are, Chris, is 3.5, and I would lean with the under in that. Based on this, I talked to 11 of the 12 Pac-12 head coaches, and what I didn't talk to is Deion Sanders, and part of the reason for that is he probably didn't know who his team was after spring practice. A lot of those guys left the squad. He was still bringing in transfers. We captured the majority of the transfers in the magazine, but none of them were really there for the spring. So he's trying to put together a team basically in a month of August to get ready for the year. And as you touched on the schedule, you open up at TCU, host Nebraska, Colorado State. When I talked to Coach Norvell at Colorado State, they're not happy about the fact that all the attention in Colorado is all on Colorado. Nobody's talking about Colorado State. That's a sneaky game there for the Rams. They have to play Oregon, USC, the tough teams of the Pac-12. The Pac-12, by the way, despite disbanding this year, is one of the toughest conferences out there this season with a lot of teams back. So I think the schedule will keep them from contending for a bowl game. That and the fact that this team has got to come together all in about a month prior to the season.
This will be the biggest test of his entire, whether he's a pro athlete or he's a coach, this is going to be the biggest test of his entire life. If he can get those guys to 6 wins, I know he wouldn't be, but I'd put him in the coach of the year consideration if he could get to 6 wins. What a tough schedule, Phil.
Yeah, tough
Rob,
schedule, tough situation. And I think a lot of teams are going to be gunning for Colorado.
Oh, I agree with you. Rob, other questions for Phil Steele?
Yeah, Phil, I am a Notre Dame fan my whole life, 52 years old. And, I saw when they brought in Coach Kelly, he was able to take them from not making it to the college Final Four, let's call it, to eventually getting there all the time, but always getting blown out, right? So here's my question. The new coach who just listening to you speak and everything you just shared, your influence and your knowledge is incredible. And Chris, by the way, unbelievable guest that you constantly put in front of me. Thank you so much. And Phil, my question to you is, I don't know who the coach is the way you would. The kind of coach that he is, whatever his style is, and the players that Notre Dame is always going to be able to recruit, is he the guy that could take them at some point to national prominence as far as winning a national championship? That's my question. In your opinion, of course.
Yeah, I think he can. And, you look at the fact that this is a guy that, was there with Fickle at Cincinnati. He of course played football, so he's players can relate to him. He's a guy that's been a big time player, and he's got the talent there this year. He's a good defensive coach, but he leaves the offensive coordinator, and I think they're in good shape there. So add it all together, I think they can get there. And if they did make the playoff, like this year's team, let's say they made the playoff, they're not going to be dominated at the line of scrimmage. They've got an outstanding offensive line and defensive line. If you can hold your own at the line of scrimmage, I think you can play in the big games. And having a veteran quarterback like Sam Hartman is a nice plus.
Is that what hurt them in the past in these big games? Was the offensive and the defensive line, or is it? I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, that was part of it. I think they did get outplayed at the, especially on the defensive line. They weren't quite up there, and then the skill players a little bit down. But they've got skill players this year. You look at Estime, the running back, Price. They got Ford, all at running back. These are all game breakers. In fact, they're so deep at running back. They took Chris Tyree, who was playing running back last year, moved him to slot back. They've got some of the best tight ends in the country. So I do like the skill players Notre Dame has this year as well.
Awesome. Chris, thank you.
You're most welcome. Phil, we're wrapping up here in a couple of minutes, but why don't you break down top 5 college football regular season games everybody should watch this year?
Yeah, well, you got to look at Alabama, LSU, and they're finally back to being Alabama, LSU. LSU had a couple of down years there, but now they're both in the top 10 heading into the season. I think that's going to be a huge game. Pac-12 wise, you got to look at USC against Oregon. That one takes place November the 11th. Could very well be between a couple of teams that are right at the top of the polls. And so that one's one to watch. Of course, in the Big Ten, here's a shocker, Chris. Ohio State against Michigan, big game. It's always a big game each and every year, and is going to be another big game this year. When I look at the Big 12, believe it or not, Oklahoma's coming off a 6-7 season last year, but in Vegas right now, they're favored in 11 of their 12 games. The only game they're not is Texas. So Oklahoma versus Texas is always a big game, and it looks to be the game between the top 2 teams in the Big 12 this year. And then if you're looking for a non-conference game to look at, how about LSU and Florida State right out of the box in the opener? You've got 2 top 10 teams battling it out. And I think the ACC, I'm going to give you 6 as opposed to 5, Chris. Your 6th one would be Clemson hosting Florida State. I think those are clearly the top 2 teams in the ACC in a heck of a battle.
Thanks, Phil. As always, you can go to philsteele.com. Phil, any final thoughts on this upcoming college football season? I guess I'll ask you, can anybody take down Georgia?
Oh, yeah. I mean, last year, Georgia almost lost at Missouri, and if Ohio State kicks a field goal at the end of the game and it goes through the uprights, we're talking about Ohio State as defending national champ. So, yes, it can easily be done. My final thoughts would be, I'm not wild about the upcoming realignment of college football where we might have 20-team conferences from across the country. I'm going to enjoy this final year where we've got some regional things like the Pac-12 and the Big Ten being the Big Ten. So that's going to be my big plus. Enjoy 2023 while it's here because the college football landscape is changing.
Well said. So for college football expert Phil Steele and CYInterview sponsor, the founder of Epic Financial Strategies LLC, Mr. Rob Gill, I'm Chris Shinnick. Gentlemen, thanks for being on CYInterview today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you for watching today's CY Interview segment from Las Vegas. Please hit the like button and please hit the subscribe button to be updated on all future CY Interview content from Las Vegas and beyond.